My daughter-in-law convinced my son I was losing my mind. Then she convinced him to cut me out of their lives completely for 12 years. Then I sold Mercer's Kitchen every last location to a national chain for $14 million, bought a house on the ridge overlooking Asheville, and 3 days later, they pulled into my driveway with a moving truck. What happened next was something I had been preparing for a very long time. My name is Frank Mercer. I am 66 years old. I built my first restaurant with my own 2 hands when I was 28, in a strip mall in Knoxville with 11 tables and a gas stove that kept going out. I named it Mercer's Kitchen because it was as simple as that. It was my kitchen. It was my name. And if the food was good, people would come back. They did. For 35 years, they kept coming back. We grew to 19 locations across 4 states. I coached Little League and went to every school play. I worked doubles on holidays so my staff could be home with their families. I was not a perfect man, but I was a decent one. My wife, Carol, died of pancreatic cancer 2 years before this story begins. She was gone in 7 months, from diagnosis to burial. Fast and cruel, the way that disease works. After the funeral, I sold the chain. I could not find the heart for it anymore. Every plate of biscuits and gravy reminded me of her standing in the test kitchen with flour on her apron, arguing that we needed more black pepper. So I took the $14 million, paid my taxes, gave generous severance packages to my long-term staff, and bought a house on a ridge in Asheville with a covered porch that looks out over the Blue Ridge Mountains. I sat on that porch every morning with a black coffee and tried to remember how to breathe. That was the life my son and his wife destroyed when they pulled up in a rented box truck on a Tuesday morning in October. My son was standing in my driveway in a sport coat that did not fit him properly anymore, his face thinner than I remembered, his hairline retreating fast. Standing beside him was my daughter-in-law. She had a way of inhabiting a space that made you feel like you were the guest and she was the host. Even in a gravel driveway she had never set foot in before, she was already surveying the property with the eyes of an appraiser. And behind them, pulling her hood up against the October wind, was my granddaughter. She was 16 now. The last time I had seen her in person, she had been 4 years old, chasing the restaurant's old tabby cat around the prep kitchen. She had grown into someone serious and quiet, with Carol's jaw and my eyes, and the particular stillness of a person who has learned that drawing attention to yourself is dangerous. My son did not apologize. He did not explain the 12 years of silence. He did not mention the Christmas I spent alone, or the night I sat in the hospital parking lot when they told me about Carol's diagnosis and called his number and listened to it ring until voicemail picked up. He walked up my porch steps, put out his hand, and said, "Dad, it is good to see you. The place looks great. We figured since you have all this room up here, and we have been going through some things, this was the right time to reconnect." My daughter-in-law was already trying the front door. I had been many things in my life. Patient was one of them. I stepped back and let them in. The next 3 hours were a performance I had not asked to attend. My daughter-in-law walked through every room of my house, naming the things she approved of and the things she would change. She told me the paint color in the kitchen was depressing. She told my granddaughter to bring the heavier boxes in from the truck. My son stood near the fireplace with his hands in his pockets looking at the floor. He looked like a man waiting for a verdict. I made coffee. I poured it. I sat at the kitchen table, and I watched them, and I waited. My daughter-in-law finally sat down across from me. She had the kind of smile that arrives before the bad news. She folded her hands on my kitchen table and told me she was worried about me. She said she had heard from people, she did not say who, that I had been forgetful lately, that I had seemed lost since Carol passed, that a man my age, alone in a house this size, was a liability to himself. She used the word liability. She said she and my son had talked about it extensively, had prayed about it even, and they felt called to be here, to help manage things, to make sure I was taken care of. She put her hand over mine and squeezed it. "We just want to make sure you are protected, Frank," she said. She had never called me Frank in 12 years of marriage to my son. She had barely called me anything. Now she was squeezing my hand and telling me I needed protecting. I looked at my son. He was nodding slowly, still looking at the floor. I looked at my granddaughter. She was standing in the doorway to the hall, with a box in her arms, and she was looking at me with an expression I recognized. It was the look of someone who desperately wants to say something, and cannot. I told them they could take the 2 guest rooms down the hall for now. I said I was tired from a doctor's appointment that morning and needed to lie down. My daughter-in-law said, "Of course, of course." Rest was exactly what I needed. She said she would take care of dinner. She was already opening my refrigerator before I left the room. I did not lie down. I went to my office, locked the door, and called my lawyer. Her name was Patricia Wynn, and she had handled the sale of Mercer's Kitchen with the kind of precision that makes large corporations nervous. When I told her what was happening, she did not say anything for a moment. Then she asked me how much time I needed. I told her I was not sure yet. I told her I needed to understand what I was dealing with first. She told me to be careful and to call her the moment anything was signed or any document appeared. I told her nothing would be signed. She said she knew, but to call her anyway. That night I listened to them through the wall. My house is well built. Old wood, thick plaster, but the heating vent in the hall carries sound in a way that the previous owners probably never thought about. I stood near my bedroom door with the vent cover off, and I listened to my son and my daughter-in-law in the kitchen below, long after they thought I had gone to sleep. My daughter-in-law's voice was not the warm, concerned voice she had used at the kitchen table. She told my son that the house was worth at least $800,000, probably more. She told him the sale of the restaurant chain had been public record and that $14 million minus taxes and the purchase of the house still left a very comfortable number sitting somewhere. She said the key was getting access before I did anything stupid with it, like giving it to charity or putting it in a trust that locked them out. My son said he was not sure about this. My daughter-in-law told him to think about what happened in Portland. He went quiet after that. I did not know what happened in Portland, but I intended to find out. What happened in Portland, I would learn over the following 2 days from Patricia's investigator and from my granddaughter, was this. My son had partnered 3 years ago with 2 men he met at a real estate investment seminar. He had put in $300,000, borrowed against a home equity line they no longer had because the house went back to the bank, and the venture had quietly collapsed under the weight of decisions that a federal investigator in Oregon was now calling potentially fraudulent. The 2 men had disappeared to places unknown. My son was the one with his name on the paperwork that remained, $300,000. And a federal inquiry that had not yet become charges, but was sitting in a government office somewhere gathering momentum. They had not come to reconnect with family. They had come because they were drowning, and they had spotted what they thought was a life raft, wearing a cardigan and sitting on a porch in the mountains. My granddaughter found me on the 2nd morning. I was in the workshop behind the house, cutting wood, an old habit. The physical work of it, the smell of sawdust. She knocked on the open door and stood there in her oversized sweatshirt looking at me the way a person looks at someone they are deciding whether to trust. I set down the hand plane. I pulled up 2 stools, and I said, "Sit down, sweetheart. I have been hoping you would come find me." She sat. She twisted the drawstring of her sweatshirt into a knot. She looked at the floor. Then she said, "She has a folder, Grandpa. A legal folder. She keeps it in her suitcase in the green bag. She has been on the phone with some man named Philip, who she calls a specialist. She says she needs you to sign something that gives them control of your medical decisions. She told Dad that once that is done, the financial part is easy because they can argue incapacity." I looked at my granddaughter for a long moment. She looked back at me. Her jaw was set. She told him. My granddaughter said quietly, "That you have been acting confused. She is going to tell that to the doctor. She already called your doctor's office and told them she was your next of kin and that you had been having episodes." I heard her. I was in the hallway. I breathed in slowly through my nose. The workshop smelled like cedar and machine oil. Outside, a hawk was making wide circles over the ridge. "Does she know you heard?" I asked. "No." "Good. I need you to keep it that way." My granddaughter looked at me with something I can only describe as exhausted hope, like a person who has been carrying something heavy alone for a very long time and has just spotted someone else who might help carry it. I told her the truth. Not all of it, not yet, but enough. I told her I was not confused. I told her I had not been confused for a single day since Carol died, and that her grandmother would have been the first to confirm that. I told her I knew exactly what her mother was planning, and that I had been 2 steps ahead of it since the moving truck pulled into the driveway. I told her I needed her to do something difficult. I needed her to go back inside and act like nothing had changed. I needed her to be the good granddaughter, to help with dinner, to say yes, ma'am, and not let her mother see any of this on her face. She asked me why. I said because the best trap is one the prey walks into willingly. She unclenched the drawstring. She looked at me for a moment longer. Then she said, "Dad didn't want to come, you know. She made him. She told him. He owed her. Because of Portland. She holds everything over him." "I know," I said. "He is not a bad person," she said. But her voice was uncertain, like she was still deciding whether she believed it. I reached over and put my hand on her shoulder. I told her that her father's goodness, or badness, was not her burden to carry. I told her she did not owe either of her parents her silence or her suffering, and that whatever happened in the next week, she was going to be all right. She nodded once, sharp and determined. Then she went back inside. I called Patricia. I told her what my granddaughter had told me. I told her about Philip, the specialist, and the green bag with the folder. I told her about the doctor's office call. Patricia made a sound that she usually makes when opposing counsel does something inadvisable. Then she told me to stay on the phone while she made 2 calls of her own. The first call was to my doctor's office, to clarify my actual next-of-kin designations, and to flag the unauthorized contact. The second call was to a colleague who handled elder law and knew the specific weight that a recorded conspiracy to establish false incapacity carried in front of a North Carolina judge. Patricia told me to buy 4 or 5 more days if I could. She said she wanted everything in place before it ended. She said she was going to enjoy this one. I spent the next 4 days being the most convincingly fragile 66-year-old in the state of North Carolina. I forgot words mid-sentence. Not important words, just enough. I called my son by his uncle's name once at dinner, and watched my daughter-in-law's eyes light up like a slot machine. I asked twice what day it was. I left a burner on the stove deliberately, with my hand right there ready to turn it off, but long enough that she could see it. She photographed it on her phone. I let her. I shuffled when I walked. I held the stair rail with both hands. I squinted at the mail, like the words were shifting. My daughter-in-law bloomed. I watched her open up like a flower in direct sunlight. Every confused moment I gave her was another brick in the wall she was building. She started speaking to me loudly and slowly. She started answering questions that people asked me before I could open my mouth. She rearranged my kitchen without asking, because she said it was safer if things were consistent. She told my son at the dinner table, while I sat right there eating my soup, that she thought it was progressing faster than she had expected. My son stared at his bowl. On the 5th evening, the folder came out. She sat across from me in the living room after supper. My son sat beside her. My granddaughter was in her room. My daughter-in-law placed the folder on the coffee table between us and opened it with the deliberate care of someone who had rehearsed this. The papers inside were dense with legal language. She had highlighted the signature lines in yellow. She told me it was a healthcare proxy and a financial power of attorney combined. Just a standard document that families use to protect elderly relatives. Nothing to worry about. Philip had explained it all to her. It was very routine. She set a pen on top of the papers. She told me it was the responsible thing to do. She said Carol would have wanted me protected. The use of Carol's name did something to the temperature in the room. My son looked up from the floor for the first time in days. I looked at the pen. I looked at the papers. I let my hand shake as I reached for it. Then I set it back down and said I needed to sleep on it. I said big decisions made me nervous, and I always slept on big decisions. I said, could we do it tomorrow? And could we maybe have some of the neighbors over? Because I liked doing important things with people around. Carol always said I was more myself with people around. My daughter-in-law's smile tightened at the corners. She said, of course. She said a small gathering sounded lovely. She said she would take care of everything. I went to my bedroom and locked the door and called Marcus. Marcus Tate had been my head chef for 22 years. He had come to Mercer's Kitchen as a line cook at 23 and never left. And when I sold the chain, he was the one I paid out of my own pocket on top of whatever the buyers gave. He was 55 now, and built like a fire hydrant, and had a laugh that could be heard from the parking lot. He was the most honest man I had known since Carol's father. I told him what I needed. I told him to bring whoever was available from the old crew. I told him to come exactly as he was, work clothes, no dressing up. I told him about the camera I had installed in the living room ceiling 4 days ago. Motion activated, and the recordings it had captured of my daughter-in-law explaining my supposed dementia to her friend Philip on the phone while I was allegedly napping. I told him I needed him here at 6 o'clock Saturday evening and to be loud when he arrived. Marcus laughed his parking lot laugh and told me he would be there. Saturday came gray and cold. The mountains wrapped in low cloud. My daughter-in-law had ordered catering. She had invited 3 couples she had found through some mutual acquaintance network. People with money. People who could serve as witnesses to what she intended to be a very public, very legitimate-looking transfer of authority. She had set out Carol's good china. She had rearranged my living room furniture without asking. I put on my good flannel shirt and my cleanest jeans and my boots, the heavy Red Wings I had worn since the restaurant days. My daughter-in-law looked at my outfit and told me I should change into something nicer. I told her I was comfortable. She pressed her lips together and went back to the kitchen. The guests arrived at 7. 4 couples. They were polished and pleasant, and they had the careful eyes of people who understand that they have been invited to witness something. My daughter-in-law introduced me to each of them with her hand on my elbow, speaking about me in the third person while I stood right there. "He has been having such a difficult time," she said. "It has been hard to watch. We are just so glad we were able to be here for him." At 7:45, a truck pulled up outside, then 2 more. The knock on the door was the kind that does not apologize for itself. I opened it before my daughter-in-law could get there. Marcus was standing on my porch with 7 people behind him. He was wearing his kitchen whites stained with what looked like a week of honest work. The people behind him were in Carhartt and flannel, and one woman had paint on her forearms she had not been able to scrub off. They smelled like cold air and coffee and the particular kind of fatigue that comes from actually doing something with your day. My daughter-in-law appeared at my shoulder. The shift in her voice was something you could feel physically, like a change in barometric pressure. "My friends," I said. "Come in, Marcus." Marcus walked in. The crew filed in behind him. The guests in the living room went quiet. My daughter-in-law stepped into the center of the room with the posture of a woman who intends to manage the situation. "I appreciate you all making the trip," she said, her voice smooth and loud. "But this is a private family event. If you are looking for the restaurant—" "We are not looking for the restaurant," Marcus said pleasantly. "It closed. You know that. Frank sold it. We are here because Frank asked us to be here. He gets confused about plans sometimes," my daughter-in-law said, glancing at the guests. "He may have mentioned something and then forgotten the context." Marcus looked at her for a moment. Then he looked at me. I nodded. "He does not look confused to me," Marcus said. My daughter-in-law's composure held, but just barely. She turned to me with her family voice, the gentle, slow voice of someone talking to a person they have decided cannot follow the conversation at full speed. "Frank, honey, maybe your friends can come back another. I would like to say something," I said. The room went quiet. Not the polite quiet of a party, but the sudden quiet of people who sense that something real is about to happen. I walked to the center of the room. My daughter-in-law said my name once more, low and warning. I did not look at her. I stood straight. I dropped the shuffle. I straightened my spine to its full height, and I looked around the room at the strangers my daughter-in-law had invited, and I spoke in the same voice I had used for 35 years to address a kitchen full of people who needed clear direction. "I want to thank you all for coming tonight," I said. "I understand my daughter-in-law told you this would be a ceremony, a transfer of authority. She told you I needed managing." The guests glanced at each other. "I have been making myself appear confused for the past 5 days," I said. "I am not confused. I have never been confused. I know what year it is. I know what I own. I know every dollar in every account and I know exactly what the documents on that coffee table are designed to take from me. My daughter-in-law stepped forward. "He does this sometimes," she said, her voice shaking slightly now. "The doctors warned us about moments of agitation where he—" "Which doctor?" Patricia Wynne walked through the front door. She was carrying a briefcase, and the particular expression she wore when she was about to make someone very uncomfortable. "Because I have spoken with Dr. Elaine Hart's office today, and the only person they have record of calling with concerns about Frank Mercer's cognition is you. Not a physician. You. That constitutes fraudulent misrepresentation to a medical provider, which is a separate matter we can discuss shortly." The room went very still. My daughter-in-law looked at Patricia. She looked at me. She looked at the guests and the crew from the restaurant, and my son standing by the wall with his arms crossed over his chest and his eyes on the floor. She chose to attack. "This is a setup," she said loudly. "He planned this. This is what he does. He manipulates people to get sympathy. He has been doing it for years. Ask anyone who knows him. He is a bitter old man who drove his own son away, and now he is trying to humiliate us in front of strangers because he cannot stand that we came back." I reached into my shirt pocket and pulled out my phone. I had already pulled up the recording. I pressed play and set the phone on the coffee table. The voice that came out of the speaker was hers, clear and unhurried, recorded 4 nights ago through the living room camera, while she stood 3 feet from the device having a phone call she did not know I could hear. "The incapacity argument is the cleanest route," her voice said. "We do not need a diagnosis, just documentation of concerning behavior. I have been keeping notes. The stove thing was perfect." Philip says, "With that, and the testimony of 2 witnesses, we file for emergency guardianship. Once that goes through, the financial power of attorney is procedural. We can have the house on the market within 60 days. He will be in a memory care facility before he knows what happened. He is 70. Sorry, 66. Doesn't matter. He is old enough that nobody is going to look too hard at it." Silence. Not the shocked gasp kind. The heavy, sinking kind. The kind that fills a room when something has been named that everyone was hoping would not be named. My daughter-in-law's face had gone the color of old ash. I picked up the phone and stopped the recording. "There are 11 minutes of that conversation," I said. "Patricia has the full recording, and 3 others from the past 5 days. We also have the phone records from the call to my doctor's office." I looked at my son. He was not looking at the floor anymore. He was looking at his wife with an expression I did not have a word for. Not surprise exactly, because I think some part of him had always known, but the particular devastation of watching something you told yourself wasn't real be proven real in front of witnesses. "Derek," I said quietly, "I know about Portland." He closed his eyes. "I know about the $300,000, and I know about the federal inquiry, and I know that she has been holding that over your head since it happened. I know you did not want to come here. I know she gave you a choice that was not really a choice." He opened his eyes. They were wet. "I am not going to help you escape the consequences of Portland," I said. "That is not something I can do for you. But I can tell you that the man who manufactured that inquiry with 2 partners who left you holding the paperwork has a name and an address. And Patricia has already been in contact with the Oregon investigator's office with that information. How much that helps you depends on decisions you make from here." My son looked at me. He looked like a much younger person suddenly. Like the boy I had coached in Little League, who used to foul off easy pitches because he was afraid to swing. I turned back to the room, to my daughter-in-law. She had her arms crossed and her chin up, and the expression of someone who has decided that, if the situation cannot be saved, it can at least be fought. "You cannot prove intent," she said. "That recording is a private conversation. It is inadmissible. The power of attorney document is legal. You are not a lawyer," Patricia said from the doorway. "I am, and you are welcome to test that argument in front of a judge. We can also discuss the financial records from your joint account showing the transfer of $22,000 from a credit card in Frank's name that you accessed without authorization last Thursday. That one is straightforward. That is a criminal matter, not civil. My daughter-in-law's chin dropped fractionally. My granddaughter, I said. Every head turned toward me. She is 16 years old. She has been in that house watching this happen and being afraid to say anything and carrying information that was not hers to carry. She warned me. She walked out to my workshop and she sat down on a stool, and she told me the truth because she had no one else to tell it to. My granddaughter appeared in the hallway. She had been there for a while, I think. She did not come all the way into the room. She stood at the edge of it, with her arms at her sides. She is not going back, I said. Whatever is decided about you and Derek tonight, she is not going back into that house. I am asking you to agree to that voluntarily. Patricia has the paperwork. My daughter-in-law looked at my granddaughter. I watched her face carefully. I was looking for love. I was looking for the instinct that overwhelms calculation. I was looking for a mother. I did not see one. What I saw was the math. Quick and cold. What my granddaughter cost versus what she was worth. Fine, she said. The word landed in the room like a stone dropped into still water. My son made a sound. It was not a word. He crossed the room in 4 steps and put his arms around his daughter and held her. She did not pull away, but she did not hold on either. She stood in his arms like someone who has learned to accept the gesture without trusting it yet. Derek, I said. He looked at me over her head. The inquiry in Portland has a path through it that Patricia's contact can help identify. Walk that path. Whatever it costs you, pay it honestly and walk it. Come out the other side without a criminal record and without owing anyone anything, and then figure out who you want to be. You are 40 years old. That is not old. I paused. But you cannot do it from here. Not right now. You need to go figure out who you are when she is not in the room making your decisions. My son stood there holding his daughter. He did not argue with me. He did not ask for money. He just nodded. Once, slowly, the way a person nods when they are accepting something they have known for a long time. The guests left quietly. There was no confrontation at the door, no dramatic exit. They simply gathered their coats and murmured good night and slipped out into the dark, one by one. 2 of the women paused at the door and looked back at me, and one of them said, "She was glad I had people around me." I thanked her. My daughter-in-law was escorted to a car by 2 of Patricia's associates within the hour. There were forms to be signed before she left: the voluntary relinquishment of guardianship claims, the acknowledgement of the unauthorized credit access, and the agreement to a period of no contact with my granddaughter while the family court process worked through the formal custody arrangement. She signed them at my kitchen table. She did not look at me once while she signed. She clicked the pen closed and set it down and walked out of my house, and I have not seen her since. Patricia handled everything with the quiet efficiency of someone who does this better than most people do anything. When it was done, and the house was quiet, Marcus took over the kitchen. That was what he did when things needed normalizing. He cooked. He found the leftover components of the catered food and reorganized them into an actual meal, the way only a professional can, and he put the crew around my kitchen table with plates and sweet tea, and the whole room smelled suddenly like a restaurant, warm and purposeful and alive in the way a space gets when it is being used for what it was designed for. My granddaughter sat at the end of the table with a plate she actually ate from. She laughed once at something Marcus said, a small, surprised sound, like she had forgotten she knew how to do it. I sat across from her and watched her and thought about Carol. Later, after the crew had gone, and the kitchen was clean and the house was settled into its nighttime sounds, my granddaughter found me on the porch. I had my coffee, even though it was 10 o'clock and I probably would not sleep well. The mountains were invisible in the dark, but you could feel them out there. The weight of them, solid and indifferent and permanent. She sat in Carol's chair without knowing it was Carol's chair. She asked me what happened next. Practical and direct. I had liked that about her from the moment she showed up in my workshop. I told her that family court would formalize the custody arrangement over the next few weeks, and that Patricia was confident about the outcome. I told her she could stay in the guest room for now, and that we would figure out enrollment in the local school before Monday. I told her that Derek's situation in Portland was genuinely uncertain, but that I had given him the best help I was able to give, and the rest was his. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Were you scared?" "When they first showed up?" I thought about it honestly. "Not of them," I said. "But I was scared of doing it wrong, of moving too fast or too slow, of losing you in the process." She nodded slowly. "The mountains breathed in the dark. I thought you were just a nice old man," she said. "When I first got here, I thought you were kind, but I didn't think you would be. I didn't think you would fight like that." I looked out at the ridge. 35 years of building something from nothing. 35 years of getting up before dawn and doing what needed doing because nobody else was going to do it. Carol standing in the test kitchen with flour on her apron. The first restaurant. 11 tables. A stove that kept going out. "Your grandmother fought harder," I said. I just paid attention. My granddaughter sat in Carol's chair and looked at the dark mountains, and somewhere in the valley a light was moving on the road, slow and steady. Someone driving home from somewhere. "I want to learn things," she said. "Real things. How to run something. How to not get taken advantage of. I don't want to be somebody who just waits to see what happens to them." I looked at her. "I know a little about that," I said. The coffee had gone cold. I did not mind. We sat there on the porch in the mountain dark, and I started to tell her about the first restaurant, the 11 tables, the gas stove that would not stay lit. She listened without interrupting. She asked questions that were exactly the right questions. I answered them. The porch light threw a warm circle around us against the October cold. We had a lot of work ahead. But the foundation was solid. And I had learned a long time ago that solid foundations are the only thing that matter when you are building something that is meant to last. If you have ever been underestimated by the people who were supposed to love you, hit that like button and subscribe to Revenge Chronicles. And leave me a comment. Was I too hard on my son? Or did he need to face those consequences? I read every single one. Until next time, take care of the people who actually show up for you. They are the ones worth building for.